You know that feeling, right? Like every time you check the news, you're just hit with another headline, another crisis facing the country. It's really easy to feel overwhelmed, kind of like you're drowning in just this constant flood of information. So today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that. We're calling it America's Interwoven Crises, a nation under strain.
That's a really good way to frame it, yeah. Our mission today is basically to cut through all that noise. We've gone through, well, quite a stack of sources that lay out the current challenges in the U.S. And we're not just going to list them off. We want to pull out the most important insights, show you how these issues that seem separate are actually deeply connected, and hopefully give you some of those aha moments that help you feel genuinely informed, but without the overload.
Oh, yeah. And the material we've gathered, it paints a pretty stark picture, doesn't it? Detailing major challenges across, well, a whole range of areas, everything from political turmoil right through to environmental pressures. We're going to unpack each one, but like you said, more importantly, show how they all kind of connect. Okay, so let's start at what feels like maybe the bedrock for so many of these challenges, the political and constitutional landscape. What are our sources really revealing about its current state? What's the deeper insight here?
Well, what's fascinating and frankly pretty concerning is how some actions seem to challenge the very system of checks and balances, that our government is built on. The research consistently points to this rising concern over what's often described as federal overreach. For instance, we're seeing cases where the National Guard might be used without state approval, or defiance of court orders, even executive actions that really push against established norms. The deeper insight, I think, is that this isn't just typical political disagreement. It feels more like an erosion of democratic norms. And that creates real cracks, potentially, in the foundational structure of how we govern ourselves.
Right. And it's not just abstract legal stuff, is it? These political tensions, they seem to be showing up in very physical, sometimes dangerous ways, like on the ground.
They absolutely do, yeah. The sources highlight a really disturbing surge in ideologically motivated violence. We're talking about specific examples like plots targeting Democratic officials, things like that. And what the data really drives home is how this rise in political violence gets amplified. It's like a mix of factors: easy access to firearms, increasingly fraught rhetoric, and the growing influence of extremist groups. It's a stark reminder, really, of how quickly political strain can move from just debate to, well, actual physical threat.
Okay. Now, while those political tensions often feel maybe centered in Washington, our sources also highlight how policy decisions, especially those born from that intense political debate, how they directly impact communities. Particularly when we look at the complex issue of immigration and border enforcement. What did you find there?
Yeah, this brings up a really important question, doesn't it, about the real-world impacts of these policies. The sources detail a highly charged political debate around immigration, and that's led to some incredibly restrictive policies being implemented. We've seen things like aggressive raids by ICE, that's immigration and customs enforcement, and
right.
These sort of zero-tolerance stances put into practice. And, predictably, these actions have ignited widespread protests and quite a bit of backlash, which just seems to amplify the polarization we were just talking about.
And sort of pivoting from that national policy level, let's talk about issues that hit even closer to home for many communities. Things like civil disorder and the challenges facing policing. What's the core tension there, based on the sources?
Well, what's striking is that even though overall crime rates have actually dropped, which might surprise some people, communities still feel unsafe, there's this sense of unease. And it seems to be exacerbated by things like low police clearance rates, meaning fewer crimes are getting solved, and these ongoing police staffing shortages. It really speaks to, I think, a deep breakdown of trust that you can feel in many areas.
You might expect civil disorder discussions to focus mostly on cities, but our sources uncovered something pretty unexpected in the data, didn't they? What did you find there? And maybe more importantly, why is this happening?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting, actually. There's a noticeable spike in police violence in rural areas. And the deeper insight here seems to be that nonviolent incidents in these rural settings are increasingly being handled by armed officers who often lack maybe the specialized training for those specific nonviolent scenarios. Historically, many of these situations like mental health crises or maybe nonviolent domestic disputes might have been dealt with by other community services. But with resource limitations and maybe a shift in approach, they now frequently become encounters with law enforcement.
Right.
So it points to maybe a broader gap in our social support systems, not just a policing problem. And that's why you hear these growing calls for better mental health interventions as more of a frontline solution.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now to the daily pressures, the things that weigh on